Contessa Brewer, it is highly likely North Korea has conducted a nuclear test that caused a man-made earthquake near a known nuclear testing site. That's according to South Korea's weather agency, as well as officials in China and Japan. The U.S. government reported a 5.1 magnitude quake. South Korea said the quake was 30 miles from the site where the North Koreans have conducted nuclear tests in the past. The last North Korean nuclear test in 2013 registered a 5.1 on the USGS scale. North Korea is known to have conducted 3 nuclear tests in the past. It's under UN sanctions for its nuclear and missile programs. And as a result of this news, South Korean shares and the won currency extended declines Wednesday. Now, European seismologists say the shaking was centered around a nuclear test facility northwest of Kilju in North Korea's northern region. Past nuclear tests have been recorded as earthquakes too, and at similar magnitudes. Again, the South Korean Meteorological Agency says it's highly likely this so-called quake was a nuclear test. Juan Zarate is the senior security analyst for CBS News.
Well, what you have is concern over continued progress in the North Korean nuclear program, combined with concerns over where the regime is headed and the instability in Pyongyang, or at least the sense of some degree of instability, and the potential that this test is part of further acts by the North Korean regime to not only threaten South Korea, but to demonstrate capabilities toward the United States. This, in combination with recent reports that there's continued development on the ballistic missile side of things, potentially even with a failed submarine-launched ballistic missile test in recent weeks, all of which raises concerns in the temperature in South Korea and the reality that you've got a real developing nuclear problem on the Korean peninsula.
This is North Korea's 4th nuclear test. The last one, as I mentioned, was in 2013, if indeed this was a nuclear test. And again, South Korea seems to indicate that is where its suspicion lies. What kind of resources does South Korea have to respond to this? And would they follow a similar response that we've seen to previous tests?
Well, the South Koreans certainly, might mobilize in certain ways to up their defenses if they also see that this test is being met with additional movements by the North Korean military or security services. And so there may be steps that they might take. But in past tests, what you've had is the international community responding with sanctions at the UN, with elements of isolation, and with collective military and security steps to demonstrate a defense of South Korea, and that has come in the form of U.S. assurances to the South Koreans. And so I don't expect that the South Koreans would do anything immediately. They'll obviously evaluate what's happened, and they'll raise concerns. But unless they see some further military activity on the part of the North Koreans, you're not going to see the North Koreans react in any dramatic way initially.
Before the new year hit, Juan, you had mentioned North Korea as one of the foreign policy areas, one of the foreign security areas that we should be watching for in 2016. What we saw last year was President Obama remaking foreign policy where we had previously isolated other nations. You saw him overhaul that in Cuba. He said, if it hasn't worked in 50 years, we need to try something new. We saw a nuclear deal done with Iran. Might there be a different kind of approach to North Korea in 2016?
It's a great question, and part of the reason I'd raised this as a real wild card for 2016 is just how variable and dangerous the North Korean situation is. You have a regime that we're still trying to figure out, with a young leader who continues to try to consolidate his power and control, in essence isolating and in some cases even killing elements of his regime and family members. They've cut off ties and relations with the Chinese, or at least that relationship has cooled to a great extent. They've continued their nuclear and ballistic missile programs, and they continue to be just a wild card in the region, and that's why I raised it as a concern. It's a good question as to whether or not there's a different approach. What the administration has tried to do is to, in some ways, continue to isolate the North Koreans and to ensure that the North Koreans aren't being rewarded for their bellicose behavior, that we don't follow the same pattern of rewarding the North Koreans every time they engage in some sort of test or activity that threatens South Korea or stability in Asia. That's clearly not working, and this notion of strategic patience with North Korea is not working. But right now, there aren't many alternatives, and I think what you're likely to see is the administration turning again to increase economic pressure and working quietly with the Chinese to try to influence what the North Koreans are doing, and frankly, trying to get a handle on what the regime is ultimately trying to do, because there aren't good solutions to the problem of Pyongyang in its bellicose state and with a pattern of using these kinds of tests and these kinds of activities to get what they want.
Who is its primary target? Who would it use a nuclear weapon against?
Well, some experts would argue that the North is trying to create both the sense of capabilities against all of its potential enemies, to include regional enemies, but also clearly the United States, that they're trying to create a deterrent effect to their nuclear program. That is to say, not just a nuclear program that has certain capabilities, but one that has the ability to project forward, and that in combination with its ballistic missile program and the potential for miniaturization of its nuclear weapons program, the real potential of being able to deliver nuclear weapons wherever they want if they build the proper capabilities, for example, with their submarines. And so, the question is really where they may decide to use these types of weapons to project their power and influence, and certainly they want to project that in the region. But the real danger for the United States is whether or not North Korea has intentions to demonstrate their capabilities as far as the Pacific, and certainly to threaten the U.S. Continent.
Juan Zarate, thank you.